The hospital cafeteria smelled like reheated coffee and disinfectant, the kind of smell that clings to the back of your throat. I was wearing a short-sleeved shirt. That was the crime. That was the thing that finally broke my mother's composure in front of 29 nurses, 2 orderlies, a charge nurse named Patricia, and the hospital's director of volunteer services, who had just sat down with a tray of soup and would never fully recover from what she witnessed. My mother's voice cut through the cafeteria, a noise the way a scalpel cuts. "Cover that scar," she said. "You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing me. Do you have any idea how disgusting that looks?" The scar runs from just below my left elbow to the inside of my wrist. It is 7 inches long, silver white now, raised in some places, indented in others, the topography of a specific afternoon in a specific country that most people in that cafeteria had never thought about and never would. The scar has a story. The story has a body count that will never be made public. I did not answer her. I did not look at her. I picked up my fork, and I focused on a point approximately 6 inches in front of my plate, and I breathed in for 4 counts, held for 4 counts, released for 4 counts. Combat breathing. The technique they teach you not because it calms you down, but because it keeps you functional. It keeps you from doing the thing you are most tempted to do. In the field, that means pulling a trigger at the wrong moment. In a hospital cafeteria in Savannah, Georgia, it meant not saying the 11 words that were sitting at the front of my teeth like a loaded magazine. My mother waited for me to flinch. I did not flinch. 22 years old, she said, louder now, performing for the room, and she can't even wear a normal shirt to her own sister's baby shower lunch. Look at her. Just look. I looked at my food. 29 people were looking at me. None of them knew what was about to walk through that cafeteria door. If you're new here, stay with me. You're going to want to see how this ends. My name is Sergeant First Class Reyes, Danny Reyes. On the rare occasions anyone outside a military context has called me by my first name in the last decade. I was 31 years old when the cafeteria happened. My branch is Army Special Operations. My MOS is 18 Delta, Special Forces Medical Sergeant, which means I'm a combat medic cross-trained in trauma surgery, field pharmacy, unconventional warfare medicine, and about a dozen other things that don't appear on any resume a civilian would recognize. My call sign is Cypher. What I actually do, I keep operators alive in places that don't appear on the mission briefings that get filed anywhere anyone can read them. I have performed surgical procedures under fire. I have carried men twice my size through terrain that had no right to let any of us out alive. Well, my mother thinks I do. Some kind of Army desk job. She has described me at various social functions over the years as a low-level government employee and, on one memorable Thanksgiving, as basically just paperwork. The pattern started early enough that I don't have a clean first memory of it. It was just always there, the way weather is always there. Not a single storm, but a permanent climate. But there are 3 moments I return to when I need to understand exactly what I was dealing with. 3 moments that explain the geometry of my family as cleanly as any tactical map. The first was my 8th grade science fair. I had built a working model of the human cardiovascular system using a small aquarium pump, plastic tubing, and food coloring differentiated by oxygenation level. I had spent 4 months on it. I had read 7 library books that were not assigned reading. I won first place for my grade and 3rd place overall in the district competition. I came home with a blue ribbon and a certificate signed by the district superintendent, and I walked into the kitchen where my mother was on the phone with her sister, and I put the ribbon on the kitchen counter, and I waited. She looked at it. She said, and turned back to her phone conversation. My sister Valeria, who goes by Val, who was 11 that year and had spent those 4 months watching television and learning a single TikTok dance that would not exist for another decade, because this is how memory compresses things. My sister had learned to tie her shoes in a bow instead of a regular knot that same afternoon. My mother got off the phone and spent 20 minutes photographing Val's feet, calling her grandmother, and describing the bow tying as honestly, "She's just so clever, she figured it out herself." My ribbon sat on the counter until I put it in my room. My mother never mentioned the science fair again. The second moment was my father's birthday dinner when I was 16. He was not absent, technically. He was present in the physical sense. He sat at the head of the table. He ate the food. He breathed the air. But my father's presence in any room was largely atmospheric. He took up space without contributing to it, which is its own kind of absence. That night, I had baked his birthday cake from scratch, a 3-layer lemon cake with cream cheese frosting that I had practiced twice and finally gotten right on the third attempt. I had also, quietly and without telling anyone, arranged for his car to be serviced because I had noticed the oil light flicker twice and I had saved my babysitting money and I had called the shop myself and handled the entire thing. My father came in from the garage where he'd gone to look at the car and he said, "Oil was changed. Tires rotated." He said it to the room generally, not to me specifically. My mother said, Val reminded me to call the shop. She said it so smoothly, so automatically, that I think she genuinely believed it within 30 seconds of saying it. Val looked at me across the table. Val said nothing. The third memory is the one that took me the longest to stop feeling in my sternum. I was 17. I had been accepted to the pre-ROTC leadership program at the State University, a competitive program that accepted 12 students per year from the entire state, students who had demonstrated exceptional academic achievement and leadership potential and physical fitness. I had trained for the fitness component for 8 months. I had written a personal statement that a teacher called the strongest she had read in 12 years of teaching. I received the letter on a Tuesday in March, and I brought it to dinner, and I set it beside my mother's plate. She read it. She set it down. She said, "We'll have to see about the cost." 3 weeks later, Val won a role in the community theater production of Annie. She was cast as an orphan, a non-speaking background role. My mother rented a specific dress for the opening night. She made a banner. She called 12 people. I signed my ROTC acceptance forms alone at the kitchen table while they were at the theater. My father was watching television in the other room. He did not ask what I was doing. I folded the forms into an envelope, and I addressed it, and I knew, with the kind of clarity that arrives, sometimes without drama or announcement, that I was on my own. That this family was a place I was surviving, not a place I was from. Surviving it, it turned out, was excellent preparation for what came next. I'm going to tell you about a specific day, because that day is the one that makes everything else make sense, including the cafeteria, including the scar, including the moment a man in civilian clothes walked through a set of automatic double doors and stopped moving so completely that the woman behind him walked into his back. The day was 18 months before the cafeteria. The location was a village in a valley that I'm not going to name because the coordinates are still active and the operation remains partially classified. But I can tell you it was mountainous. It was cold in the mornings and brutally hot by noon, and the road into the village had been mined 3 times in the previous 4 months. We had been called in because a partnered force patrol had hit an IED, improvised explosive device, pressure plate design, fairly sophisticated trigger mechanism. And there were 4 casualties, 2 of them critical. I was the senior medical asset on the QRF, the Quick Reaction Force, and we were on the ground within 11 minutes of the call. The scene when we landed was what we call a complex casualty environment. Multiple wounded, multiple points of bleeding, 1 man who had lost consciousness and whose airway was in danger. I did not have a clean, choreographed memory of the next 47 minutes. What I have is a series of vivid frames. A tourniquet applied at the high and tight to a leg that was no longer complete below the knee. A needle decompression performed on a tension pneumothorax. A collapsed lung with pressure building in the chest cavity. Using a 14-gauge catheter, I positioned in the second intercostal space at the midclavicular line while someone was still shooting from a ridgeline to our north. A jaw thrust and a supraglottic airway device for the unconscious man, followed by bag valve mask ventilation, while my corpsman managed 2 other wounds simultaneously. I was lying in approximately 4 inches of cold mud for most of this. I was wearing body armor that weighed 31 pounds. I was not wearing a short-sleeved shirt. 4 men went home alive who would not have otherwise. One of them lost the lower half of his leg and told me 2 years later, at a ramp ceremony for someone else entirely, that I had argued with the pain in his voice until he stopped feeling it. I don't remember saying anything to him. I was too busy with his femoral bleed to have a conversation. But he remembers it, so maybe something came out of me on autopilot, the way training does when conscious thought gets out of the way. The scar happened during extraction. A secondary device. The secondary is the one designed to hit the responders, not the initial patrol, a technique that had become more common in that area. I was in the process of moving the last casualty to the medevac bird when the pressure plate went. I was not close enough to die. I was close enough to take shrapnel through my left forearm, 3 fragments, 2 of which went through cleanly, one of which required surgical removal once we were back at the forward operating base. The surgeon who removed it was 29 years old and had been doing this for 14 months and had the particular kind of calm that people develop when they have stopped being surprised by human bodies in extremis. He stitched me up. I was back on duty within 72 hours because we were short-staffed and the alternative was worse. The scar that resulted runs from just below my left elbow to the inside of my wrist. 7 inches, silver white now, the permanent record of a day that saved 4 lives and is documented exactly nowhere that my mother has ever seen. The notification she sent me while I was still on that forward operating base, 11 hours after the incident, while the surgical wound was still being managed with packing, and I was eating a protein bar and trying to refill my own blood volume within 4 line one of my corpsmen had placed because my hands were not steady enough yet to place it myself. That notification was a text message. It said, "Danny, I need 2,400 for Val's new headshots. She has an audition, and you have the savings. You never spend it on anything anyway, let me know." I wired the money the next morning. I did not tell her what had happened the day before. She did not ask. Let me give you the ledger. I have kept it since the beginning because I am a person who documents things. Training does that. The habit of recording resources, expenditures, mission-critical data, it transfers. The ledger lives in a spreadsheet on a password-protected drive, and I have looked at it approximately twice since I started the process of closing out. The total across 6 years of deployment pay, hazard pay, combat zone tax exclusions that I redirected rather than saved, and 3 separate disability payments for documented injuries sustained in the line of duty. The total wired home to my mother's account is $163,847.00. I'm going to tell you what some of that money purchased. It purchased 2 lease payments on a car Val chose because it was the same color as one she had seen on Instagram. It purchased a kitchen renovation that my mother described to her friends as something she finally treated herself to. It purchased Val's headshots on 4 separate occasions, none of which produced the acting career my mother was confident was imminent. It purchased a week in Cancun that I learned about when my mother posted the photos and tagged me in one of them, a photo of a margarita, caption "Girls Trip, we needed this," as though I had been present. I had been in a country that does not have margaritas or poolside chairs or photographs that get posted anywhere. It purchased a Vitamix blender, a specific Vitamix blender that my mother referenced in a text as the good one, Danny, not just a regular blender. I ate ramen in the specific way of someone who is not doing it by choice. The kind where you add a fried egg if you're feeling extravagant. The kind where the sodium content is genuinely concerning, but the caloric density is what matters because you have a physical job in a physically unforgiving environment. I own 2 pairs of civilian clothes, jeans and a gray long-sleeve shirt, both purchased at the same Army Post Exchange in the same transaction because I happened to be near a post exchange for 40 minutes and remembered that I had nothing to wear to the one family event I had agreed to attend that year. Val owned a coat that cost more than I'd spent on clothing in 3 years. My mother owned a handbag that cost $847. I know this because the receipt came through on the shared Amazon account she had asked me to set up for her and never disconnected. $163,847.00. I kept the ledger because I knew I would need it eventually. The baby shower lunch for Val's friend. Not even Val's baby, Val's friend's baby, which is a distinction my mother made irrelevant by treating the occasion as a personal social performance, was held in a hospital cafeteria because the friend was on bed rest upstairs and couldn't travel. My mother had organized the lunch as a workaround, which was actually thoughtful, and I want to say that clearly because I am not a person who rewrites history to make myself the hero. She did a kind thing in an unkind way, as she often did. I had driven 4 hours to be there. I had taken leave for it. I had brought a gift, a specific gift, a hand-stitched quilt I had commissioned from a woman on a military spouse crafting forum, because I had spent enough time on bases to know that hand-stitched quilts from military spouse crafting forums are actually extraordinary objects made by people with remarkable skill and too much time separated from the people they love. I walked into the cafeteria at 11:47 in the morning wearing jeans and my gray long-sleeved shirt, the civilian clothes, the two items, the entire civilian wardrobe, and my mother looked at me and said, "You didn't change?" I had not changed. I had no other options. "That's what you're wearing," she said. It wasn't a question. The tables had been pushed together. There were 29 nurses from the maternity ward, apparently long friendly with Val's friend, along with the two orderlies and Patricia, the charge nurse, and the volunteer services director with her soup. There were balloons, pink and white, because the baby was going to be a girl. There was a sheet cake from the public bakery department with "Welcome Baby Sophia" written in pink icing. I sat down. I was reaching for the water pitcher when my mother saw the scar. I think she had forgotten about it. Or perhaps she had simply never looked directly at it before. The way you don't look directly at things you have decided are inconvenient. The short-sleeved shirt. The borrowed shirt, actually, because I had left my gray long-sleeved shirt in the car, and a nursing student from upstairs had lent me a clean blue scrub top because my original shirt had a coffee stain from the drive, and the scrub top had short sleeves. The short sleeves meant the scar was visible in a way it usually wasn't. My mother's face changed. "Danny." Her voice was a specific kind of quiet that was actually louder than shouting. "Cover that scar." 29 pairs of eyes moved toward my arm. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said. "You're embarrassing me. Do you have any idea how disgusting that looks?" And then the speech, the performance, really, because there is no other word for the way she deployed language in public spaces about my age and my clothing and my inability to present myself like a normal person, culminating in a detailed description of how Val had learned to dress appropriately for occasions, how Val understood that public spaces require a certain standard, how Val had a career. And here she turned to the room, inviting them into it, making them witnesses, how Val was a brand consultant for several significant social media influencers and was very much in demand and very respected in her industry, and didn't walk into rooms looking like she'd come from the garage. Val said nothing. Val looked at the sheet cake. Val's fake career as a brand consultant for social media influencers was built, as far as I could document, on a single unpaid Instagram collaboration with a woman who sold essential oils and a business checking account that received exactly zero in the most recent quarter I had inadvertently seen a statement for. The statement had come in the mail to my mother's house during my last visit, and my mother had handed it to me to put on the kitchen counter. I had seen the balance before I put it down. It was $11.43. Val was a brand consultant the way I was a low-level government employee. I breathed in for 4 counts. I held for 4. I released for 4. I looked at a 0.6 inches in front of my plate. The cafeteria double doors opened. I did not know he was there at first. I was focused on the middle distance and the breath cycle and the practice stillness that is not actually stillness, but controlled expenditure of energy, the way a held position in a sniper hide is not rest but sustained discipline. I was aware of the cafeteria and noise, shifting, not silencing, just reorganizing, the way a room's sound changes when something interrupts the pattern. Then I heard a sound I had not heard in 18 months. It was a man's voice saying, approximately, "Wait. No, that's..." And then nothing intelligible, just the specific register of someone whose brain has outrun his mouth. I turned my head. He was in civilian clothes, khaki pants, a blue button-down shirt that did not fit him correctly across the shoulders because he was a man whose body was built for a different kind of clothing, the kind with rank insignia and a branch tape. He was carrying a cafeteria tray. He was standing completely still in a way that people who have not been trained to stand completely still generally cannot achieve. The weight distributed, the spine straight, the eyes fixed. Fixed on me. His tray was listing to the left because his left hand had gone slack. The woman behind him, a nurse in light blue scrubs, walked into his back and said, "Oh, sorry." And he didn't move. His name is Master Sergeant Dale Okonkwo, United States Army, and he had been downrange with me in that valley 18 months ago. He had been one of the QRF team leaders. He had been approximately 40 feet from me when the secondary device went off, and he had helped apply the pressure bandage to my arm while the medevac bird was inbound. And he had said, at the time, with the specific dark humor of people in that profession, "Cypher, I swear to God, if you bleed out on this hillside, I will be so annoyed." I had told him that was extremely motivating. He had been visiting his cousin, who was the patient in the room upstairs. I learned this later. What I knew in that moment was that he was staring at me and that his heels had come together involuntarily, the way they do when someone whose body has been trained to a specific posture encounters the person that training attached to, and that his face had done something complicated and involuntary. He stammered. He actually stammered. This man who I have seen maintain a briefing voice while an RPG landed close enough to rattle fillings. This man who had coordinated a QRF extraction under fire without raising his vocal register by a single note. He said, "Cypher, Sergeant First Class, ma'am," and stopped. My mother said, "Excuse me, we're in the middle of something." He didn't hear her. He was looking at my arm, at the scar. His jaw did a thing. My mother said, "Louder." I said, "We are in the middle of a private." "That scar," he said, not to her, to me, to the room. Really, because he was a person whose voice, when it reached a certain frequency, simply filled the available space. "Ma'am, that scar," he stopped. He reorganized. His training caught up with his mouth. "I was there when you got that." I was 40 feet away. He looked at my mother for the first time. "You know how she got that scar?" My mother opened her mouth. He did not wait for her answer. What he said next lasted approximately 3 minutes and 40 seconds by my internal count. I'm going to compress it here because the full version, the part with the valley, the IED, the secondary device, the 4 operators who were medevaced alive, the specific surgical procedure I performed on a collapsed lung under active fire. The full version is the kind of thing that turns a cafeteria of 29 nurses very quiet in a way that has nothing to do with social discomfort. He did not sensationalize. He was a Special Forces team leader, and Special Forces team leaders are not given to sensationalism. He stated facts in the order they occurred. He named the type of explosive device. He described the casualty count and the outcome. He described what I had done and in what sequence. He described the secondary detonation and the shrapnel path and the angle of my arm at the time of impact. He described what the arm looked like when he reached me and how long it took him to stabilize the wound enough for my own evacuation. He used the words Sergeant First Class Reyes 6 times. He used the words "save their lives" twice. He used the phrase "the most capable combat medic I have ever worked with in 19 years of service" once. My mother said, at one point, well, she never told us any. He looked at her. She stopped talking. Across the table, Val's face had gone the color of the cream cheese frosting on a sheet cake. Patricia, the charge nurse, had put down her coffee cup. The volunteer services director had not touched her soup. 29 nurses were completely silent. My mother, in the airless pause after Okonkwo finished, said the thing that was perhaps the most revealing thing she had ever said in my presence. She said, "She could have told us she was doing something important." Okonkwo looked at her for a long moment. He said quietly, "Ma'am, she was busy keeping people alive." I looked at my plate. I breathed in for 4 counts. Held for 4. Released for 4. I said 2 words. "Thank you, Dale." That night, I was in my car in the hospital parking garage for 47 minutes before I drove to the hotel I had booked because I had learned a long time ago not to stay at my mother's house. I sat in the driver's seat, and I opened the banking app on my phone, and I looked at the screen for a while, the way you look at a map before a mission, understanding the terrain before you move through it. Then I started moving. Automatic transfer to my mother's account. Recurring $2,100 monthly. Canceled. Automatic transfer to the joint account that was technically in my name and my mother's name for household expenses. The account that had been funding Val's lease and the kitchen renovation and the Good Vitamix blender. $800 monthly. Canceled. Automatic transfer for Family Emergency Fund, which had been used twice for actual emergencies and 11 times for things that were not emergencies. $500 monthly. Canceled. The 3 small automatic payments I had set up years ago for specific bills at the house, internet, streaming services, a grocery delivery subscription my mother had mentioned once, and I had somehow ended up paying for. I went through each one in sequence. Canceled, canceled, canceled. Total recurring monthly outflow, terminated, 3,400. I had been executing this supply line for 6 years and 2 months. Military language for it. A sustained logistics operation providing material support to a dependent element. More accurate military language for it. A supply line to a position that had never asked where the supply was coming from and had never sent anything back. Severed supply line. Terminated logistics. In the field, you do not announce when you cut resupply to a compromised position. You simply stop the trucks. I stopped the trucks. Then I opened my email and I wrote one email to 2 addresses, my mother's and Val's, with a subject line that said FYI and a single PDF attached. The PDF was my unclassified service record, rank progression, commendations, deployment history, injuries sustained, awards received. Not the classified elements, not the specific operations, just the record of a person who had existed in a specific way for a specific number of years, documented in the cold administrative language of a large government organization that has no interest in drama. I pressed send. I sat in the parking garage for another few minutes. I drove to the hotel. I ordered room service, a real meal, the kind with protein and vegetables, the kind that requires a menu, and I ate it in bed and watched a documentary about deep-sea fish that have evolved bioluminescence in complete darkness, their bodies generating their own light in an environment that offers none, and I thought that was interesting, and then I went to sleep. The specific sequence of consequences took 11 days to complete itself, though I was only present for portions of it. The first call came from my mother 2 days after the email. I let go to voicemail. She had called 9 times before leaving the voicemail. The voicemail was 4 minutes and 32 seconds long and covered, in sequence, disbelief, hurt feelings, accusations that I had always been cold and difficult, the suggestion that Rayal family doesn't do things like this, a reference to everything I sacrificed for you that I found genuinely interesting given the geometry of our financial relationship, and a final request that I call back when I've calmed down. I was extremely calm. I was, in fact, operating at what I would characterize as baseline. I did not call back. On day 4, Val's lease payment declined because the account that had been auto-paying it was now unfunded. Val called me from the dealership. I was in a meeting. I did not answer. She left a voicemail that was mostly the word seriously in various emotional configurations. On day 6, my mother attempted to use the grocery delivery account. It was deactivated. She sent a text that said, "Danny, this is not funny people need to eat." I sent one text back. It said, "I know." That was all. On day 9, the business account that Val had been using for her brand consulting operation, the account that had received several of my transfers labeled as small business support at my mother's request, that account triggered an audit notice because the declared income on the business registration was inconsistent with the actual deposits over the previous 2 years in a way that a simple automated bank review could flag. I did not cause this. It was a consequence of the account's own internal contradictions, which had been stable only because regular incoming transfers had been maintaining the appearance of cash flow. Without the transfers, the inconsistency became visible. The business examined was not a business. I learned this from Val's second voicemail, which was longer than the first and contained a phrase, "You have no idea what you've done," repeated 4 times. I had a very precise idea of what I had done. On day 11, my mother called one final time, early in the morning, my time zone, which she had known for years and had never adjusted to. She was not performing this time. That was how I knew it was different. The performed voice has a specific frequency, a specific cadence, the practice cadences of someone who has been using language as a tool since before they were conscious of doing so. This voice was not that. This voice was someone standing in a kitchen that no longer made sense. She said, "I didn't know." I said, "You didn't ask." There was a long silence. I said, "I hope you're okay, Mom." Then I ended the call. 2 sentences. Cold is the wrong word. Accurate is the word. It was the most accurate response I had in me, which is not the same as cold, but I understand why it would feel that way to someone who was expecting something else. 3 months later, in the kind of morning that October offers in the Pacific Northwest, clean-aired, unhurried, the light arriving sideways through the mountains like it has a specific destination and isn't rushing, I was sitting on the porch of the house I had rented for myself for the first time in my life. A real house, not a room in a barracks or a bunk or a hotel with room service and deep-sea fish documentaries. And I was drinking coffee that I had made myself with good beans I had. Bought because I felt like it. I was wearing a short-sleeved shirt. The morning was cold enough that I probably should have worn long sleeves. I wore the short sleeves anyway, not as a statement. I'm not a person given to symbolic gestures in my personal life. I save the symbolism for moments that require it. I wore them because it was my porch, and my morning and my arm and the scar on it belongs to a specific afternoon in a specific valley where 4 men went home alive, and if the morning wanted to see it, the morning could. I had a book open on my lap. Not a field manual. Not a training document. A novel, the kind with slow sentences and complicated people and no clear tactical objective. I had been trying to read more novels. I was finding that my brain resisted the lack of mission structure and then gradually let go the way a muscle releases when it finally accepts it's safe to release. I was not at peace in any clean or cinematic sense. I do not believe in clean peace. I believe in functional peace, the kind where the operational environment has changed and your posture adjusts accordingly, where you're no longer spending energy on something that has been neutralized. My family had been a resource drain that I had disguised to myself as an obligation. I had confused loyalty with supply logistics. I had kept the trucks running long past the point where the position was worth supplying because I had learned very early that the absence of a supply line would be interpreted as an absence of love, and I had not wanted to confirm what I suspected my mother already believed about me, which was that I was cold and difficult and incapable of the right kind of feeling. What I had actually been doing, I understood now, was surviving. And when you have survived something, you do not owe it continued payment. I thought about Okonkwo, standing in the cafeteria with his listing tray and his jaw doing a thing and his feet coming together without his permission. I thought about Patricia, the charge nurse, and her coffee cup. I thought about 29 nurses in a room that had just received information they had not expected to receive. I did not think about my mother's empty kitchen voice. I was not carrying it. There's a thing they tell you in the service, not in any official document, but in the way actual human beings transmit actual wisdom in actual situations, which is that the mission ends when the mission ends. You do not keep running the mission after it's over. You debrief. You document. You rest. You pick up the next thing. The mission had ended. I turned the page of the novel. The mountains held their light. I drank my coffee. That was enough. If this story stayed with you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Hit like if you know someone who keeps running a mission that ended a long time ago. And leave a comment. I read every single one.